A baby buffalo thrown into the abyss survives against all odds, but its true strength goes far beyond life and death. Something extraordinary is about to happen, and no one is ready for it. The afternoon was slowly falling over Cedar Ridge, a small town nestled among the mountains of Montana. The sun, still strong, bathed the verdant fields of Morgan Ranch, where Ellen walked among her precious buffaloes. Her steps were firm, despite the fatigue of someone who had dedicated more than 20 years to raising these animals. "Come here, Star," she called, approaching the buffalo cow that had just given birth. Beside its mother, a snow-white calf nursed frantically. A rarity, a miracle of nature that made Ellen's eyes shine with emotion. However, her joy soon gave way to concern. The small animal had one of its front legs slightly crooked and seemed more fragile than normal. "Miss Ellen," shouted Jack, her foreman, running in her direction. "There's a car coming up the ranch road." Ellen's face instantly hardened. She knew exactly who it was before she even saw the black Range Rover parking near the corral. "Go to the house and keep watch, Jack. I'll handle this." Richard Montgomery stepped out of the vehicle with the artificial elegance of someone who never needed to dirty his hands with hard work. His impeccable suit contrasted with Ellen's muddy boots, a difference he made sure to highlight with a smirk. "Ellen Morgan, each day more rustic." "What do you want here, Richard? This is private property." "Just making a courtesy visit to my biggest competitor," he replied, walking toward the pasture. "I heard about the white calf. A true treasure, isn't it?" The mention of the newborn sent a chill down Ellen's spine. Richard was known for his unhealthy obsession with conquests and victories, especially after she defeated him at the National Buffalo Breeders' Championship 5 years ago, exposing his illegal doping practices. "I have nothing to show today. I ask you to leave." Richard laughed, a sound that contained no trace of joy. "You still think you can give me orders, don't you? The great Ellen Morgan, the woman who humiliated Richard Montgomery in front of the whole country. You humiliated yourself when you decided to cheat." Richard's smile disappeared. With a discreet movement of his hand, 3 men emerged from the vegetation around them, surrounding Ellen before she could react. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, while 2 men held her by the arms. "Showing who really runs the agribusiness in this region." The 3rd man ran towards Star and her calf. The buffalo cow tried to protect the little one, but was quickly restrained and tied to a nearby tree. Her desperate neighs echoed across the field as the man grabbed the white calf. "Please don't do this," begged Ellen, tears now freely running down her face. "The calf is innocent. Your quarrel is with me." Richard approached the calf, examining it with false interest. "You call this a prize-winning specimen?" he sneered. "This crooked leg? This animal is as pathetic as its breeder." He signaled to the man holding the calf and began walking toward the cliff that cut across the edge of the ranch. Ellen struggled, screaming and begging, but the men holding her only laughed. "This animal is nothing but a weakness in your herd," said Richard, reaching the edge of the abyss, "and weaknesses need to be eliminated." With a cold, calculated movement, the man holding the calf threw it over the cliff. The anguished sound of Star mixed with Ellen's scream of horror as she fell to her knees when the men finally released her. "This is just the beginning, Ellen," whispered Richard, leaning down to look her in the eyes. "I'm going to destroy everything you've built piece by piece." When the Range Rover disappeared down the dirt road, a light rain began to fall as if the sky was crying along with Ellen. She remained motionless, her body trembling, her mind filled with pain and guilt. While the storm intensified over Cedar Ridge, Michael Davis watched the dark clouds through the window of his small cabin. At 65, the old fisherman led a solitary life on the banks of Cedar Creek, far from the bustle of town. His only companions were the books and stories he carried in his memory. That night, something disturbed his spirit. It wasn't just the roar of thunder or the howl of wind through the trees. It was a different sound, almost imperceptible to anyone not accustomed to nature's whispers. "Sounds like a lament," he murmured to himself, squinting to see beyond the curtain of rain. Without thinking twice, Michael put on his raincoat, grabbed a flashlight, and went out into the stormy night. The heavy raindrops lashed his wrinkled face as he followed the sound that grew increasingly clear, a weak, desperate neigh. The path was dangerous. The trails that Michael knew so well during the day transformed into slippery traps under the trembling light of his flashlight. But something drove him to continue, a force that even he didn't understand. After walking against the wind for almost an hour, Michael reached the edge of the cliff that cut across Morgan Ranch's land. The sound came from below, from the depths of the abyss. Pointing his flashlight, he could hardly believe what his eyes saw. Good heavens! Down there, miraculously, trapped between the roots of a tree growing on the rocky wall, was a white buffalo calf. The animal trembled from cold and fear, its front leg clearly hurt but still alive. Carefully, Michael found a steep path that descended along the side of the cliff. His calloused hands clung to rocks and roots as he slowly descended, ignoring the risks to his own life. "Easy, little one." "I am coming to help you," he whispered, more to calm himself than the animal. When he finally reached the calf, Michael realized that the situation was even more miraculous than he had thought. The fall should have been fatal, but the roots had formed a kind of natural net that cushioned the impact. The animal was frightened and injured, but its black eyes shone with an inexplicable strength. "You're a warrior, aren't you? A true survivor." Michael removed his coat and wrapped the calf, lifting it with difficulty. The return journey would be even more arduous, but he didn't hesitate. Step by step, facing the mud and rain, the old fisherman carried his precious cargo to the cabin. Once inside the shelter, Michael lit the fireplace and began drying the calf with old towels. He prepared an improvised bed with blankets and put some warm milk in a bowl. "You need a name, little miracle," he said, watching the calf now eagerly drinking the milk. "I'll call you Spirit, because you came back from the other world." The days that followed, Michael cared for Spirit with the dedication of someone who had found a new purpose in life. He used his knowledge of medicinal herbs to treat the wounds and immobilized the crooked leg with bamboo splints. The calf responded surprisingly well to the care, as if it had an extraordinary life force. News about the rescued white buffalo spread quickly through the riverside community. Children were the first to appear at Michael's cabin door, curious to see the mysterious animal. "Mr. Michael, can I touch him?" asked Mary, a 10-year-old girl who suffered from paralysis in her legs and used a wheelchair. "Of course, little one, but be careful, he's still recovering." What happened next left Michael dumbfounded. When Mary touched Spirit's soft fur, the calf emitted a gentle neigh and rested its head on the girl's lap. For a moment, time seemed to stop. A strange warmth radiated from the animal, enveloping Mary in an almost imperceptible aura. "Mr. Michael," exclaimed the girl's mother, who was watching the scene from the door. "Look!" The toes of Mary's feet, previously immobile, began to move slightly. The girl looked down, surprised and frightened. "I can feel my feet, Mum. I can feel them." Michael couldn't believe it. It was impossible, irrational, inexplicable. But it was happening before his eyes. Somehow contact with Spirit had awakened sensations in Mary's paralyzed legs. "This can't be coincidence," Michael murmured to himself. As news about the miracle spread through the community miles away, in Richard Montgomery's luxurious mansion, a phone call brought information that would provoke an even greater storm than the previous nights. "What? Alive? What do you mean, alive?" Richard's voice echoed through the corridors, full of fury and disbelief. Ellen Morgan hadn't slept properly for 3 days. Images of the calf being thrown over the cliff tormented her dreams, turning her nights into endless nightmares. During the day, she wandered through the fields of her ranch like a ghost, unable to look at Star, who continued searching insistently for her calf. "Ms. Ellen, you need to eat," insisted Connie, the housekeeper who had worked at the ranch for more than 15 years. "I can't, Connie. Each time I close my eyes, I see it all again." The housekeeper sat beside her on the porch, holding her hands with maternal affection. "Life goes on, my child. We can't change what happened, but we can choose how to move forward." At that moment, the phone rang inside the house. Connie got up to answer it, returning minutes later with a puzzled expression. "It's Teresa, Mary's mother. She seems agitated and says she needs to speak with you urgently, something about a white buffalo calf." Ellen's heart instantly accelerated. She picked up the phone with trembling hands. "Teresa, what happened?" "Ellen, you won't believe it." The voice on the other end overflowed with emotion. "It's a miracle. Mary is feeling her legs again." "What do you mean? What happened?" "It was the white buffalo calf that Mr. Michael rescued from the cliff 3 days ago. When Mary touched it, something happened. She started feeling her feet, Ellen, after 5 years in a wheelchair." Ellen almost dropped the phone. A whirlwind of emotions invaded her. Hope, disbelief, fear. "Teresa, are you saying the calf Yibba survived?" "Yes. Mr. Michael found it during the storm. It's in his cabin recovering. And it's not just Mary. Sebastian's son, that boy who was born with a problem in his arm, he's also showing improvements after visiting the calf. People are calling the animal miraculous." Without waiting another second, Ellen grabbed the keys to her pickup truck and headed toward Michael's cabin. Her heart beat strongly in her chest, divided between joy for the calf's survival and fear of what Richard would do when he found out. Michael's cabin was about 3 miles from the ranch headquarters, near the banks of Cedar Creek. When Ellen arrived, she was surprised to see several people gathered outside. Parents with children, elderly, sick, all waiting their turn to see the miraculous calf. Michael received her at the door, his wrinkled face illuminated by a serene smile. "Knew you'd come sooner or later, Miss Ellen. Is it true, Michael? Did he really survive?" The old fisherman gestured for her to follow him to the back of the cabin, where a small improvised stable had been built. There, lying on fresh straw, was the white calf. Its front leg was immobilized with bamboo splints, but its eyes were alive and alert. "Spirit," called Michael, approaching the animal, "look who's here to see you." Ellen fell to her knees before the calf, tears freely flowing down her face. She extended a trembling hand and touched the animal's soft fur, which watched her with an almost human intelligence. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "The fall should have—" "Some things have no explanation, Miss Ellen. This little warrior was sent by something greater than all of us." At that moment, a girl of approximately 10 years entered the stable, supported by crutches. It was Mary. Her face radiated contagious happiness. "Miss Ellen, you came to see Spirit too?" The girl approached, taking slow but firm steps. "Look, I'm walking. Yesterday I managed to stand on my own for the first time." Ellen hugged the girl, unable to contain her emotion. "It's a miracle, Mary. A true miracle." For hours, Ellen remained in Michael's cabin, watching the people who came to see Spirit. Each story was more impressive than the last. Children with physical problems showed surprising improvements. Elderly with chronic pain felt relief. Even people with more serious diseases reported an inexplicable sense of well-being after contact with the calf. When night fell, only Ellen and Michael remained in the stable, talking in low voices while Spirit slept peacefully. "Richard can't know about this, Michael. He'll try to hurt the calf again." "Too late, Miss Ellen. News like this spreads like wildfire in dry grass." As if to confirm the old fisherman's words, Ellen's cell phone rang. It was Jack, her foreman. "Miss Ellen, Richard Montgomery was here looking for you. He seemed furious and made threats. Said he knows about the calf and that he'll finish the job this time." Fear tightened Ellen's heart again. She looked at Spirit, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the approaching danger. "I won't let him hurt you again, little one," she promised, gently caressing the calf's head. "This time I'll be prepared." Michael watched the scene with wise and concerned eyes. "You know it's not just the calf's life we should worry about now, right?" he said, gesturing to the people still waiting outside. "Spirit has become a symbol of hope for all these folks. If something happens to him—" Richard Montgomery threw the crystal glass against the wall of his mansion, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. His eyes, injected with fury, fixed on the man in front of him, who was visibly trembling. "How did you allow this to happen, Carson?" he vociferated, clenching his fists. "A buffalo calf surviving a fall like that? And now the whole town is talking about miracles? Carson, his foreman and trusted man, swallowed hard. Sir, no one could predict that a fisherman would be nearby that night. It was a coincidence. Coincidence? Richard let out a dry laugh. Do you know what happens when we let coincidences interfere with our plans? We lose everything. He walked to the window, observing the view of his imposing ranch. From the top of the hill, he could see Ellen's property in the distance, a constant reminder of his public humiliation. Do you have any idea what's happening in that cabin? He continued, without looking at Carson. People are calling that calf miraculous. They say it's healing the sick. Sir, with all due respect, those are just superstitions of simple people. Nobody really believes that. I don't care if it's true or not, interrupted Richard, turning abruptly. What matters is that Ellen Morgan is once again becoming the center of attention. First, she humiliates me at the national championship. Now she has a miraculous animal on her ranch. I won't allow this. A younger man entered the room at that moment. It was Greg Montgomery, Richard's son and heir to his empire. At 30, he already demonstrated the same ambition and coldness as his father. Dad, I think we should approach this more strategically, he said, pouring himself a whiskey. We have an excellent opportunity here. Richard stared at his son, intrigued. Continue. Instead of trying to eliminate the calf, why don't we try to acquire it? Suggested Greg with a calculating smile. If this animal really has special properties, imagine the value it could have. We could transform it into an exclusive attraction, charge fortunes for rich and desperate people to have access to its supposed healing properties. A gleam of greed lit up in Richard's eyes. He considered the idea for a few moments, stroking his chin. Interesting, son. Very interesting. Furthermore, continued Greg, Ellen is facing financial difficulties. I know from reliable sources that the bank is about to foreclose on part of her land. She'll need money, and fast. Richard smiled, satisfied with the cruelty of the plan that was beginning to form in his mind. We'll offer an amount she can't refuse, and if she refuses, well, there are always other means of persuasion. At the other end of town, in Michael's small cabin, an improvised meeting was taking place. Ellen, the old fisherman, and some local residents were discussing how to protect Spirit from Richard's threats. We need to take him to a safe place, suggested Teresa, Mary's mother. Far from here, where Richard can't find him. And abandon all the children who need him, questioned Michael, shaking his head. No, Spirit is here for a purpose. Ellen remained silent, watching the calf playing on the floor with some children. His leg, previously crooked, already showed signs of recovery, as did the small injuries from the fall. Michael is right, she finally said. We can't run away. We have to face Richard as equals. But how? Asked Jack, Ellen's foreman. He has money, power, influence. He can destroy all of us if he wants to. At that moment, Ellen's phone rang. She answered with hesitation, recognizing the number. Hello? Ellen, darling, Richard's voice sounded falsely cordial. We need to talk about a matter of mutual interest. We have nothing to talk about, Richard. Oh, but we do. I'm willing to make a generous offer for the white buffalo calf. Let's say $500,000. Enough to solve your financial problems, don't you think? Ellen felt her blood freeze in her veins. How did he know about her financial difficulties? Spirit is not for sale. Everyone has a price, Ellen. Richard's voice hardened. Yours might be higher, but I guarantee I can pay it. $1 million in cash. Think about what you could do with that money. For a brief moment, Ellen hesitated. The ranch was really on the verge of bankruptcy. The bank threatened to take part of her land, including the pasture where Star and the other buffaloes grazed. With $1 million, she could save everything she had built over a lifetime. But then her eyes turned to Spirit and to the children playing with him. The joy on their faces, the hope that had been reborn in their families. Some of them already showed visible signs of improvement in their conditions. There is no money in the world that could pay for what this calf represents, Richard. My answer is no. A silence laden with tension hung on the line for a few seconds. You'll regret this decision, Ellen. Deeply. The call was abruptly ended. Ellen remained motionless, the cell phone still in her hand, a somber presentiment tightening her chest. "What did he want?" asked Michael, approaching with concern. "To buy Spirit. He offered $1 million. Surprised murmurs echoed through the cabin. For many of those simple residents, it was an unimaginable amount. "And what did you answer?" questioned Teresa, with evident apprehension. Ellen knelt beside Spirit, caressing his soft fur. The calf looked at her with those deep, wise eyes, as if perfectly understanding the gravity of the situation. "I told the truth, that there is no money in the world that could pay for what Spirit represents to all of us." The news about the miraculous white buffalo calf quickly spread beyond the borders of Cedar Ridge. In a few days, the small Montana town, previously known only for its natural beauty, became a destination for desperate families seeking healing for their loved ones. The dirt road leading to Michael's cabin transformed into a veritable improvised camp. Colorful tents dotted the banks of Cedar Creek. Cars and chartered buses filled the parking lot recently marked out by Jack, and a line extending for more than 500 yards formed daily. "This is getting out of control, Michael," commented Ellen, watching the crowd through the cabin window. "We can't attend to all these people," the old fisherman sighed, running a hand through his grey hair. "I can't deny hope to those who need it, Miss Ellen, but I agree we need more organization." Spirit, now almost 2 weeks old, already showed significant recovery. His crooked leg responded well to treatment with the splints, and the injuries from the fall had completely healed. The most surprising, however, was his interaction with sick people. The calf seemed instinctively attracted to those who suffered, approaching them with an almost supernatural gentleness. That morning, a television station from Missoula had sent a crew to cover the phenomenon. The reporter, a young woman of metropolitan appearance, interviewed the people in line, clearly skeptical about the supposed miracles. "And you really believe that a buffalo calf can cure illnesses?" she asked an elderly lady waiting in line. "My granddaughter had cerebral palsy, miss," the lady replied with simplicity. "Yesterday, after touching Spirit, she spoke for the first time at 5 years old. She called me Grandma. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is." Similar stories repeated. A man who recovered part of his movement after a stroke. A child with severe autism who, after contact with Spirit, began to interact with his parents. And teenager with epilepsy who hadn't had seizures for days. The reporter, gradually losing her skepticism, managed an exclusive interview with Ellen at the end of the day. "Ms. Morgan, how do you explain these phenomena? Do you really believe the calf possesses healing powers?" Ellen hesitated before answering. She didn't want to feed false hopes, but she also couldn't deny what she witnessed daily. "I have no scientific explanations to offer," she finally replied. "What I know is that Spirit survived an impossible situation, and since then, we have witnessed small miracles every day. Whether this is divine work, nature, or something we don't yet understand, I can't say." "And what about the rumors that businessman Richard Montgomery tried to acquire the calf for $1 million? Ellen's eyes instantly hardened. "Spirit is not for sale. He belongs to the community now." The interview aired that same night on the state news, and by the next morning was replicated on national network programs. In a matter of hours, Cedar Ridge transformed into the epicenter of frenzied media coverage. Journalists, curious onlookers, and even more people seeking healing began to arrive in overwhelming numbers. In Richard Montgomery's mansion, the businessman watched the report with an evil smile on his lips. "It's perfect," he murmured, turning off the television. "Exactly as we planned." Greg, seated beside his father, nodded in agreement. "The media is doing our work for us. Soon the situation will become unsustainable for Ellen and that old fisherman. They don't have the structure to deal with this crowd." Richard stood up, walking to the bar to pour himself a drink. "And when everything collapses, we'll be there to offer the solution." "Has the mayor already signed the order?" asked Greg. "He'll sign it this afternoon. I've arranged everything with him." Richard smiled with satisfaction. "In the name of public safety and collective health, the town hall will intervene and take control of the situation. And guess who will be appointed responsible for the treatment center that will be created?" Greg laughed, raising his glass in a toast to Ellen Morgan's ruin. Meanwhile, at Michael's cabin, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. The simple structure couldn't accommodate the growing flow of visitors. There was a lack of water, bathrooms, accommodations. The camped people were beginning to present health problems due to the precarious conditions. "We need to do something, Michael," insisted Ellen, visibly worried. "We can't continue like this." The old fisherman agreed, tired after another long day attending to the crowd. "Maybe we can transfer Spirit to a larger place, your ranch perhaps?" Before Ellen could respond, firm knocks sounded at the door. It was the mayor of Cedar Ridge, accompanied by the chief of the municipal guard, and a man in a suit whom she didn't recognize. "Good evening, Ms. Morgan, Mr. Davis," greeted the mayor, visibly uncomfortable. "I regret to inform you, but I need to deliver this to you." He extended an official document with the town hall's letterhead. Ellen took it with trembling hands and began to read. "This is absurd," she exclaimed upon understanding the content. "You can't do this." "Unfortunately, we can and must," replied the mayor, avoiding her gaze. "It's a matter of public health. The situation here is out of control." The document was a municipal intervention order. The town hall would assume control of the area and access to the buffalo calf, creating a therapeutic treatment center to manage the flow of visitors. And at the bottom of the document, the name that made Ellen's blood boil. Richard Montgomery, appointed special coordinator of the project. "This is a blatant setup," she protested. "Richard is behind this, isn't he?" The mayor remained silent, confirming her suspicions. "You have 24 hours to transfer the animal to the new facilities being prepared," informed the man in the suit, who introduced himself as the town hall's legal advisor. "Otherwise, we will be forced to carry out compulsory removal." When the town representatives left, Ellen collapsed in a chair, the document still in her hands. "I won't hand over Spirit," Michael's voice echoed through the small cabin, surprising everyone with its unusual firmness. The old fisherman, normally calm and conciliatory, was standing, fists clenched and face reddened with indignation. "This calf was entrusted to me. I feel I have a responsibility to him and to all these people who found hope here." Ellen, Jack, and other local residents who had gathered to discuss the situation observed the old man with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Michael, I understand how you feel," Ellen said softly, "but we're talking about the town hall, an official order. If we resist, they might use force." "And if we hand Spirit over to Richard, what will happen?" questioned Teresa, squeezing her daughter Mary's hand, who had progressed from crutches to just a cane in a few days. "He'll transform something pure and miraculous into a business. He'll exploit people's faith and desperation." A heavy silence fell over the group. Outside, dozens of people still waited in line, many having traveled for days to have the chance to meet the miraculous calf. "Perhaps there's an alternative," suggested Father Anthony, the local parish priest, who had come to offer support. "A legal way out." All eyes turned to him. "The document mentions that Spirit must be transferred to adequate facilities for public health reasons," continued the priest, adjusting his glasses while rereading. "The municipal order, what if we provide these facilities right here, on appropriate land before the 24-hour deadline?" Jack became animated with the idea. "The church has that large plot of land near the creek, doesn't it, Father? We could build a temporary shelter there, with portable toilets, tents, and if we organize it in a community effort system with everyone helping, we can finish before the deadline," added Ellen, a gleam of hope illuminating her eyes again. "Yes, the parish gladly cedes the land," confirmed Father Anthony. "And I'm sure many people in line would also help." The idea quickly took shape. Ellen used her savings to rent portable toilets and buy construction materials. Jack mobilized the ranch employees. Teresa and other women from the community organized a food distribution system. In a few hours, what was just an idea transformed into a veritable war operation. Under the light of powerful reflectors, men and women worked tirelessly through the night. Hammers knocked, saws cut, instructions were shouted. A large shed began to take form, with partitions to create an organized waiting area and an adequate space for Spirit. "Look at this," murmured Michael to Ellen, observing the crowd working harmoniously. "It's as if spirit had awakened something in people, something beyond the hope of healing, a willingness to unite, to help." Ellen nodded, moved. "That's why we can't let Richard take control. It's not just about the calf, but what he represents for all these people." The next morning, when the mayor and his advisors arrived to verify if the order had been followed, they were dumbfounded by what they found. Instead of a simple cabin surrounded by a chaotic camp, they saw an organized structure with orderly lines, adequate bathrooms, tents for rest, and a small improvised infirmary. "What does this mean?" questioned the mayor, visibly disconcerted. "It means we've fulfilled the requirement," responded Ellen with a triumphant smile. "We've provided adequate facilities to receive visitors, as requested in the document. The land was officially ceded by the Catholic Church. We have temporary sanitary licenses, and the organization is being done by trained volunteers." She handed the mayor a folder with various documents: the land cession signed by the bishop, emergency licenses issued by a health inspector who was the father of one of the children benefited by Spirit, and even a legal opinion from a lawyer attesting to the legality of the operation. The mayor examined the papers with growing discomfort, while the legal advisor scratched his head, looking for some flaw in the plan. "This is irregular," he finally stammered. "No, Mr. Mayor, it's perfectly legal," intervened Father Anthony, approaching the group. "The problem pointed out by the town hall was the lack of adequate structure and risks to public health. We solved that problem in record time. There's no more reason for municipal intervention." The mayor swallowed hard, clearly thinking about what he would say to Richard Montgomery. I'll need to consult our legal department about this." "Feel free," Ellen replied cordially. "Meanwhile, we'll continue attending to these people who so much need hope." When the town representatives withdrew, visibly defeated, a chorus of applause erupted from the crowd watching the scene from a distance. Ellen, however, knew that the battle was far from over. In Richard Montgomery's mansion, the news was received with an explosion of fury. "Incompetence!" he shouted, throwing the phone against the wall. "How did they allow them to circumvent the order like that?" Greg observed his father with a calculating expression. "They were clever, Dad, but this doesn't change our plans, it just delays them a bit." Richard breathed deeply, trying to regain his composure. "You're right. Ellen may have won this battle, but the war has just begun." His eyes shone with malice. "If we can't use the law to our advantage, we'll use other means." "What do you have in mind?" A cruel smile formed on Richard's lips. "Remember that buffalo cow, the calf's mother? Star, I think that's the name Ellen gave her." He made a dramatic pause. "They say animals have very strong maternal instincts. How about reuniting mother and child?" Greg raised his eyebrows, immediately understanding the insinuation. That would create quite a distraction. The new structure, mounted on the church land, quickly became a symbol of hope and unity for Cedar Ridge. In the days that followed, volunteers from all over the region presented themselves to help. Doctors offered basic care, cooks prepared meals. For visitors, students organized activities for children waiting in line. Spirit, now almost 3 weeks old, grew healthy and strong. His front leg, once crooked, now showed only a slight curvature, almost imperceptible. The white calf had an established routine. In the morning, he received the most serious cases. In the afternoon, he interacted with small groups of children. And at night, he rested under the watchful care of Michael and Ellen, who took turns in shifts. On that sunny Thursday afternoon, Ellen observed Spirit playing with a group of children in the pen specially built for him. There was something different in the calf's behavior today. He seemed more agitated, as if he sensed something. "He's restless," Ellen commented to Michael, who was approaching with a bottle of water. The old fisherman nodded, his experienced eyes analyzing the animal's movements. "I noticed that too. He's more alert, as if he's waiting for something." Before they could discuss further, they were interrupted by Jack, who arrived hurriedly, his face marked with concern. "Ms. Ellen, we need to talk urgently." She stepped aside with the foreman, leaving Michael with the children. "What happened, Jack?" "Star is missing," he announced without beating around the bush. "I went to feed the buffaloes this morning and she wasn't in the pasture. We searched the entire ranch, but there's no sign of her." Ellen felt a chill down her spine. Star, spirits. Mother was an extremely docile buffalo and had never tried to escape before. This doesn't make sense. She knows every inch of that ranch. How could she simply disappear? "We found part of the fence broken," continued Jack, lowering his voice. "It wasn't an accident, Miss Ellen. Someone deliberately released her." The understanding of what was happening hit Ellen like lightning. "Richard," she whispered. "He's planning something." As if to confirm her fears, a murmur began to form among the people in line, exclamations of surprise and pointing toward the main road. Ellen turned, and what she saw made her heart race. An imposing black buffalo cow walked slowly down the road, escorted by two men on horseback. "Star. My God, what is he doing?" Ellen murmured, immediately recognizing the horsemen as Richard's employees. In the distance, observing the scene from his luxury vehicle, Richard and Greg smiled, satisfied with the confusion that was beginning to set in. "Let's see how Saint Ellen handles the chaos," commented Richard, adjusting his binoculars to better observe the situation. Back at the improvised center, Spirit immediately noticed his mother's presence. The calf began to get agitated in the pen, emitting calling sounds that were soon answered by Star. The buffalo cow, recognizing her calf's call, accelerated her pace, easily knocking down the fragile barriers trying to contain her. Panic quickly set in. Visitors ran in all directions, trying to escape the path of the enormous buffalo cow that advanced determinedly toward her son. The volunteers tried to organize the evacuation, while Michael ran to protect Spirit. "Ellen!" shouted the old fisherman. "She's going to knock everything down." Ellen, however, didn't share the general panic. Instead, a strange calm enveloped her. Perhaps it was her years of experience handling buffaloes, or perhaps it was something deeper, an intuition that even she didn't completely understand. Walking slowly toward Star, she began to speak in a low, melodious voice. "Easy, my beauty. Everything's all right. I know you missed your calf. Nobody's going to stop you from meeting him. Easy." To everyone's amazement, Star slowed her pace, her eyes fixed on Ellen. Years of mutual trust spoke louder than momentary desperation. The buffalo cow stopped, snorting nervously but without advancing further. "That's it, good girl," continued Ellen, cautiously approaching. "Let's take it easy. Your calf is fine, I promise." From the car, Richard watched incredulously. "What is she doing? This wasn't supposed to happen." Slowly, Ellen led Star to the pen where Spirit awaited, anxious. Carefully, she opened the gate, allowing mother and son to finally reunite. The moment was magical. Star approached her calf delicately, sniffing him as if to make sure it was really him. Spirit, in turn, hopped animatedly around his mother, emitting sounds that seemed of pure joy. The people, who before were fleeing in panic, now cautiously returned, attracted by the beauty of that reunion. Many took photos, others cried, moved. What should have been a tragedy orchestrated by Richard transformed into another chapter of Spirit's miraculous story. "I think we underestimated our adversary," commented Greg, visibly irritated with the turn of events. Richard didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on Ellen, who now caressed both mother and calf with a serene smile on her lips. Something in that scene deeply disturbed him. "No, son," he finally said. "We didn't just underestimate Ellen. We underestimated the power of that calf. Look." Greg followed his father's gaze and saw what he was pointing at. People were beginning to approach again, forming a circle around Star and Spirit. And among them, some of the children who had been cured by the calf now extended their hands to touch the mother as well. "What does this mean?" asked Greg, confused. Richard narrowed. His eyes, a new idea forming in his calculating mind. "It means our plan needs to change. It's no longer just about the calf. We need both, mother and son." Back at the pen, Michael approached Ellen, who continued beside the animals. "You transformed a disaster into a miracle," he commented, admiring her. "It wasn't me, Michael," replied Ellen, watching how Spirit and Star gently interacted with the children around them. "It was destiny." Richard thought he was harming us, but actually, he ended up helping us. The old fisherman smiled, his wise eyes shining. Perhaps that's the true miracle Spirit brought us, the ability to transform evil into good, hatred into love. At that moment, something extraordinary began to happen. Mary, the girl who previously needed a cane to walk, took her first steps completely alone towards Star. Upon touching the buffalo cow's fur, a soft and almost imperceptible light seemed to emanate from the point of contact. "Look!" exclaimed Teresa, the girl's mother, pointing emotionally. "She's walking on her own." The news of the reunion between Spirit and Star spread rapidly, attracting even more attention to Cedar Ridge. In less than 24 hours, news crews from all over the country arrived in the small Montana town, transforming what was a regional phenomenon into a national event. Ellen, despite the unexpected exposure, remained discreet. She left Michael as the official spokesperson for the Center of Hope, a name the volunteers had given to the place. The old fisherman, with his simplicity and natural wisdom, won the sympathy of journalists and the public. "I have no scientific explanations for what happens here," he would say to the cameras. "I only know that nature has its own mysteries, and Spirit and Star seem to be carriers of something special that we don't yet understand." That Sunday morning, the center received a visit from a medical team from the University of Montana, interested in studying the recovery cases attributed to the buffaloes. Among the researchers was Dr. Cecilia Matthews, a renowned neurologist who specialized in cases of paralysis and motor disorders. "Ms. Morgan, thank you for allowing us to conduct this research," said the doctor as they walked through the center. "I confess I came skeptical, but the reports I've analyzed so far are at the very least intriguing." Ellen smiled gently. "Everyone arrives skeptical, Doctor. It's natural. I myself had difficulty believing at first." The neurologist adjusted her glasses, observing Spirit and Star in the special pen where they received visitors. "The preliminary exams we conducted on some patients show inexplicable improvements. Mary, for example, shows nerve regeneration in areas that were completely damaged after the accident. This defies everything we know about medicine." As they conversed, they didn't notice the arrival of a luxurious black SUV. Richard Montgomery descended from the vehicle, accompanied by Greg and an older man of distinguished appearance who carried a leather portfolio. "Good morning, Ellen," greeted Richard with false cordiality. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Ellen felt her body stiffen. This was the first time Richard had appeared personally at the center since the incident with Star. "What do you want here, Richard?" "Just a civilized conversation," he indicated the man beside him. "This is Dr. Albert Fields, an old family friend and also one of the most respected geneticists in the country." The scientist extended his hand politely, which Ellen shook with hesitation. "I've been following the reports about the calf and his mother with great interest, Miss Morgan," explained Dr. Fields, "and I believe I can offer some answers." Intrigued, Ellen agreed to talk with them in a small room improvised as an office inside the main shed. Dr. Matthews, who had witnessed the encounter, asked permission to participate in the conversation, which Ellen promptly accepted, grateful to have an ally present. Once settled, Dr. Fields opened his portfolio and removed some documents and photographs. "Approximately 5 years ago, I was leading research on genetic modification in bovines," he began. "We were seeking to develop a lineage with greater resistance to diseases and capacity to adapt to extreme climates. One of the compounds we developed had a curious side effect. It produced a protein that, in laboratory tests, demonstrated accelerated cellular regeneration capacity." Ellen and Dr. Matthews exchanged glances, beginning to understand where the conversation was leading. "This research was financed by the Montgomery conglomerate," continued the geneticist, "and it had the potential to revolutionize not just cattle raising, but also regenerative medicine. Imagine treatments for spinal injuries, degenerative diseases, even some types of cancer." "And what does this have to do with Spirit and Star?" asked Ellen, although she already suspected the answer. Richard intervened, leaning forward with eyes shining with ambition. "Star was one of the experimental animals, Ellen. When she was just a calf, She received the compound developed by Dr. Fields, and apparently she transmitted this genetic modification to her offspring. A heavy silence fell over the room. Ellen tried to process the information, while Dr. Matthews made frantic notes in her notebook. "Why was I never told this?" questioned Ellen finally, addressing Richard. "Star was sold to me as a common animal, without any mention of genetic experiments." Richard shrugged, unconcerned. "The project was discontinued when investors lost interest. We thought the effects of the compound had disappeared after a few months, as happened with the other test animals. We didn't imagine that Star would be different, much less that she could transmit the modification to her offspring." "But this is unethical," exclaimed Dr. Matthews, indignant. "You released a genetically modified animal without follow-up, without informing the authorities." Dr. Fields seemed genuinely embarrassed. "It was an error in judgment on our part, I agree. But when we heard about the white calf and its apparent healing properties, we realized we needed to investigate." Ellen looked at Richard with growing suspicion. "And what do you want now?" "A partnership," he promptly replied. "Dr. Fields needs to study Spirit and Star to understand why the compound's effect manifested so powerfully in them. This could lead to extraordinary medical advances, and naturally to astronomical profits for the Montgomery conglomerate," Ellen completed with irony. Richard smiled without denying. "Business is business, Ellen, but think of the possibilities. Revolutionary treatments, cures for diseases considered incurable. We can't let this potential be lost because of personal quarrels." Dr. Matthews, who had been observing the conversation with growing scientific interest, intervened. "If what Dr. Fields says is true, this would explain the results we're observing. But the analysis would need to be conducted with total transparency, following rigorous ethical protocols." Ellen breathed deeply, trying to organize her thoughts. The revelation that Star and Spirit carried artificial genetic modifications was shocking, but it also explained a lot. At the same time, she knew Richard well enough to know that his intentions were rarely altruistic. "I need to think," she finally said, "and consult Michael and the community. Spirit and Star don't belong just to me now." Richard nodded, standing to leave. "Of course, take your time, but don't take too long." His eyes hardened slightly. "There are many government agencies that would be extremely interested in knowing about genetically modified animals circulating freely." The revelation about the origin of Star and Spirit left Ellen deeply disturbed. After Richard and Dr. Fields departed, she remained silent in the small improvised office room, while Dr. Matthews observed her with concern. "Ellen, I know this is a shock, but we need to act with prudence," said the doctor nervously, adjusting her glasses. "If what they said is true, we're looking at something revolutionary for medicine." Ellen raised her eyes, tired and teary. "All this time, I believed Spirit was a miracle of nature. So many people placed their faith in him, and now I discover it's all just a genetic experiment." "Do you really believe Richard?" questioned Michael, who had just entered the room after being informed of the situation. "That man is capable of any lie to get what he wants." Dr. Matthews rummaged in her bag, pulling out some sheets of paper. "I may not know Richard Montgomery, but the preliminary results of the exams we did on some children show cellular alterations inexplicable by conventional science. Dr. Fields' story seems consistent with what we're observing." The three were interrupted by growing agitation outside. Teresa entered the room hurriedly, her face pale. "You need to see this. Government agents just arrived. They're demanding to inspect Spirit and Star. They say they received a complaint about genetically modified animals." Ellen exchanged a significant look with Michael. Richard hadn't wasted time with his veiled threats. "We can't let them take the animals," said the old fisherman, his voice trembling slightly. "You've seen what's happening out there. People from all over the country depend on the hope that Spirit and Star represent. But if we resist, we'll be breaking the law," pondered Ellen. "That will only give Richard more ammunition." Dr. Matthews, who had remained thoughtful until then, suddenly stood up. "Perhaps there's a third option." All eyes turned to her. The university could request temporary custody of the animals for scientific research purposes. This would give us time to understand what's really happening, and more importantly, ensure that any medical benefits discovered are accessible to everyone, not just those who can pay. The idea hung in the air for a few seconds as Ellen considered the implications. "You could really do that?" "I can make some calls right now," confirmed the doctor. "We have a robust legal department, and the dean is a sensible man who will understand the importance of this case." While Dr. Matthews went out to make phone calls, Ellen and Michael walked to the pen where Spirit and Star rested peacefully, oblivious to the turmoil forming around them. About 10 federal agents, uniformed and carrying official documents, were talking with volunteers at the entrance to the center, while dozens of anxious visitors observed the scene, fearing for the future of the miraculous buffaloes. Regardless of what we discover about their origin, what happened here in the last few weeks was real, murmured Michael, watching the white calf playing carefree. "No one can deny the lives that were transformed." Ellen nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. "How do we explain this to people, Michael? How do we tell them that what they considered divine was created in a laboratory?" Before the old fisherman could answer, they were interrupted by the arrival of Father Anthony, who approached with hurried steps. "Ellen, the agents are insisting. They say they have an immediate seizure order." "Ask them to wait a few more minutes," she replied. "Doctor, Matthews is trying to find a solution." The priest hesitated, looking at the animals and then at the worried crowd. "I think we need to tell the truth to the people," he finally said, "or at least what we know so far. They deserve that." Ellen pondered the advice for a few moments, knowing the priest was right. With a nod of agreement, she headed to the small improvised stage used for announcements, asking for a microphone. When people realized she was going to speak, an expectant silence fell over the place. Even the federal agents paused their activities, curious. "My friends," Ellen began, her voice slightly trembling, "today we received information that may change how we understand what's happening here." She paused, searching for the right words. Star Spirit's mother apparently was part of a scientific experiment years ago, an experiment involving genetic modification that may explain the special abilities we have been witnessing. A buzz of surprise and confusion spread through the crowd. Some seemed shocked, others skeptical, and some even disappointed. "This doesn't mean that what you experienced wasn't real," she continued, raising her voice above the growing murmur. "The improvements, the medical progress, the renewed hope, all of this happened, regardless of the origin of the phenomenon. And now we need to collectively decide what to do next." A middle-aged woman raised her hand, asking to speak. She was the mother of a girl with cerebral palsy, who had shown significant improvements after several visits to Spirit. "Miss Morgan, I don't care if it was God or science that brought us this blessing. I only know that my daughter smiled for the first time in 3 years after meeting Spirit. Please don't let them take this hope from us." Other voices joined in support, creating an emotional chorus of testimonies. People who had experienced the beneficial effects of contact with the buffaloes shared their stories, some with tears in their eyes. Among the crowd, surprisingly, was Anna Louise Montgomery, Richard's ex-wife, who approached the stage with determined steps. Ellen knew her only by sight, knowing that their divorce had been turbulent years ago. "May I speak?" asked Anna Louise, extending her hand for the microphone. Intrigued, Ellen nodded, handing her the equipment. "My name is Anna Louise Montgomery," she began, her firm voice echoing through the center. "And there's something all of you need to know about Richard Montgomery and these genetic experiments." An absolute silence took over the center of hope when Anna Louise Montgomery held the microphone with firm hands. Her eyes, determined and slightly teary, scanned the crowd before fixing on Ellen. The genetic project of which Star was a part wasn't simply discontinued, as Richard claimed, she began, her clear voice cutting through the tense air. It was shut down because I, as the scientific director of the Montgomery conglomerate at the time, discovered that my ex-husband was using the research for unacceptable purposes. Surprised murmurs serpentined through the crowd. Anna Louise took a deep breath before continuing. Dr. Fields was indeed developing a protein with regenerative potential, But Richard diverted the project for unauthorized research. He wanted to create animals that could be commercially exploited, selling their tissues on the black market for experimental treatments for desperate billionaires. The federal agents, who until then had been observing from a distance, approached the stage with renewed interest. When I discovered his plans, I gathered evidence and threatened to expose him publicly. That's when our marriage crumbled, continued Anna Louise, now addressing the agents specifically. I have in my possession all the original project documents, including records of which animals received the treatment and the unauthorized modifications made by Richard's order. One of the agents, apparently the leader of the group, climbed onto the stage and whispered something to Anna Louise. She nodded and handed him a flash drive she carried in her pocket. These documents prove that both Star and other animals were illegally sold after the official closure of the project, without the knowledge of the competent authorities. Richard knew exactly what he was doing when he sold Star to Ellen Morgan. The revelation fell like a bomb on those present. Richard, who had returned to the center accompanied by Greg and was observing the scene from afar, visibly paled. His son grabbed his arm, urgently whispering something in his ear. Ellen, recovering from the initial shock, approached Anna Louise. "Why are you doing this now? Why didn't you speak before?" Anna Louise smiled sadly. "I tried, Ellen. Years ago, when you exposed Richard's doping practices at the national championship. I tried to make contact, but he did everything to keep us apart." She paused, looking at the buffaloes in the pen. "When I heard about the white calf and the miracles it was performing, I understood I couldn't remain silent any longer." The federal agent who had received the flash drive returned to the stage after consulting the documents on his laptop. "Ladies and gentlemen, in view of the new evidence, we are temporarily suspending the seizure order for the animals," he announced. "However, we'll need to establish a rigorous scientific monitoring protocol." It was at this moment that Dr. Matthews returned, accompanied by a middle-aged man with an academic appearance. "I arrived just in time, it seems," she commented, climbing onto the stage. "This is Dr. Paul Rivers, Dean of the University of Montana. He agrees to establish a partnership with the Center of Hope to scientifically study the therapeutic effects of Spirit and Star, ensuring the community's continued access to the animals." The Dean took the floor, briefly explaining the university's proposal. "We'll keep the buffaloes here in their current environment, with appropriate scientific and medical supervision. Any discovery resulting from this research will be public. Property, accessible to all who need it." A wave of applause and exclamations of relief swept through the crowd. Visitors hugged each other, some cried with emotion. Hope, momentarily shaken, resurged with even greater strength. On the other side of the center, Richard observed the scene with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Anna Louise, his ex-wife, had kept the evidence all these years, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy him. And now, with the university taking control of the research, his dream of profiting from the discovery turned to smoke. "Let's go, Dad," insisted Greg, pulling him by the arm. "The federal agents are already looking at us." But before they could discreetly exit, they were intercepted by two men in suits who identified themselves as federal police agents. "Mr. Richard Montgomery, we'd like you to accompany us to provide some clarifications about the documentation presented by Mrs. Anna Louise." As Richard was escorted out, his face contorted with anger, Ellen observed the scene with a strange sense of closure. The battle that had begun years ago, when she denounced Richard's illicit practices at the championship, finally came to an end. In the pen, Spirit played carelessly under the watchful eye of Star. The visitors, now calmer, formed the line again to interact with the animals, their faith renewed despite the scientific revelations. Michael approached Ellen, his wrinkled face illuminated by a serene smile. "It seems our little miracle has survived yet another impossible fall," he commented, referring not just to the literal fall from the cliff, but also to the crisis that almost destroyed everything they had built. "You always believed, didn't you, Michael, even when I doubted?" The old fisherman shrugged, his wise gaze fixed on the white calf. "Some things simply don't need explanation, Ms. Ellen. Whether science or miracle, What matters is what happens here. He pointed to his heart. The hope that was reborn in these people. 3 months passed since that decisive day. The Center of Hope flourished, transforming into an internationally respected institution. The partnership with the University of Montana resulted in the creation of the Cedar Ridge Regenerative Research Institute, where scientists from around the world studied the therapeutic effects of spirit and star. Richard Montgomery faced various legal proceedings for scientific fraud and illegal commercialization of genetically modified animals. His empire began to crumble, while Greg, in a surprising turnaround, decided to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for leniency. Anna Louise, professionally rehabilitated, assumed the scientific coordination of the institute, working side by side with Dr. Matthews and a multidisciplinary team. Together, they managed to isolate the protein responsible for the regenerative properties of the buffaloes and develop experimental treatments for various medical conditions. Ellen, for her part, restructured her ranch with help from university investments. Morgan Ranch became a specialized breeding center, providing structure for scientific studies while maintaining its traditional production. On a sunny spring afternoon, while observing Spirit, now a young and strong buffalo but still with the same distinctive white coat, grazing peacefully beside Star, Ellen reflected on the extraordinary journey they had traveled. Mary approached, walking naturally without a cane or any support. At 11 years old, it was impossible to imagine that, months before, the girl had been confined to a wheelchair. "Miss Morgan, do you still think it was just science?" asked the girl, following her gaze toward the buffaloes. Ellen smiled, putting her arm around the girl's shoulders. "You know, Mary, the more science advances in its discoveries about Spirit and Star, the more mysteries seem to arise. The regenerative proteins explain a lot, but not everything." "Like the fact that Spirit survived the fall?" "Exactly. Or how he seems to know exactly who needs his help the most." Ellen paused, contemplative. "Perhaps some miracles are simply nature, operating in ways we don't yet fully understand." The girl nodded, satisfied with the answer. Together, they watched. The sunset bathing the verdant fields of Cedar Ridge with a golden light, while the Center of Hope in the distance continued receiving visitors seeking healing, comfort, or simply a bit of renewed faith. For Ellen, the greatest revelation of that entire journey hadn't been about advanced genetics or supernatural powers. It was about how hope, once ignited, could transform not just bodies and minds, but an entire community. And that, she thought, as she walked back home with Mary at her side, was the true miracle of Spirit.